talking about those mistakes with our peers, all of a sudden everyone else started talking about their mistakes and how they want to try and fix them. And it was just kind of a realization, like how safe everyone felt in that moment. And that's when I started going down this kind of spiral of, okay, what do we have here? Because I knew what I was looking at was not usual. It wasn't common to see that in an organization where everyone was so willing and felt safe enough to have those conversations in an open forum like that with all their peers.
You on 8? You on 8. Okay, you're clear. Stand by for your base.
Welcome to EMS Cast, where we provide high-level education for you, the providers on the streets. I'm your host, Ross Orpet, and I'm a practicing emergency physician and EMS doc, and my co-host, Will Berry, is a critical care flight paramedic. Today's episode is about how mistakes can actually save lives. Our speaker today is the one and only Geoff, spelled Geoff Murphy, who many of you will recognize as the founder of Master Your Medics and author of 100 Patient Scenarios. We caught up with Geoff at the Fast 24 conference in Wilmington, North Carolina, after he had just given a lecture about the importance of embracing failure. As you listen to the episode, think to yourself, how can I emulate this? How can I drop my ego and be more vulnerable about my own mistakes? How can I help create a culture of ownership, safety, and humility within my own organization? Throughout today's episode, I'm going to periodically chime in to highlight some of the key concepts Geoff talks about, because this is that important. In the challenging, chaotic world of pre-hospital medicine, mistakes are not just inevitable, but they are also an integral part of our learning process. Hiding or ignoring these mistakes can have severe consequences, both for patient safety, but also for our own professional development as pre-hospital providers. One of the differences between high and low performing teams is that high performing teams report more mistakes. They're not making more mistakes. They just talk about them more. They have a culture of safety and vulnerability where they can talk about their mistakes out loud and learn from them together as a team. This continual learning is a big contributor to their high performance. So sit down and get ready for some self-reflection, because Geoff is going to walk us through this concept and how it can be displayed within our own organization. Today's episode is brought to you by Frontline Optics, sunglasses made by first responders for first responders. More on them later in the show, but if you would like 15% off a sweet pair of sunglasses, they're giving our listeners a discount if you use the code EMS Cast 15 at checkout. That's EMS Cast 15. Now to the episode. So you, Geoff, gave a great talk on a very important topic today that I'm hoping to learn a little bit more from you about. And as I was reading the subject for your talk today, it reminded me of literally my favorite quote of all times, which is from a famous emergency physician named Peter Rosen. And this quote is, "As difficult as it can be to stand in front of your peers and relate to them that you made an error, remember that if just one peer learns from your misadventure, then you have accomplished something wonderful and important. You have become a teacher." So tell me how you came up with the idea for your talk and where that came from.
Well, I wish I heard that quote before I went on stage, because I would have definitely taken. That's great. It's so true. That talk originated from a mistake that I felt that I made in training someone that was new, and I put them in a vulnerable position to make a mistake. And so I felt that error was on me as a clinical educator. And so that's kind of where that conversation started. And to relate to that quote, I think that it was incredibly valuable in the end, because when we started talking to our peers about this call after the fact and debriefing together in a pretty open forum with all of our flight paramedics there, I think that was incredibly valuable for that trainee to see, because it was probably pretty easy to just sweep it under the rug. We've already reported the near miss, all that kind of stuff. And so we didn't really have any reason to talk about it in that situation because all the due diligence was done. But the fact that it did happen and for them to see it, I think was invaluable, because now they get to see and experience what happens when you talk about that mistake is that everyone else jumps to your aid and everyone wants to share their experiences with that. And I think that they can carry that for the rest of their career. And so I think that's a really fantastic thing. And that's what I wanted to talk about, is that when you have a psychologically safe environment, anything's really possible in becoming a high performance team.
This can't happen without a psychologically safe environment. How do you create that? It can honestly start with you. You can demonstrate your own vulnerability by being willing to talk about your mistakes out loud. If you lead with your own vulnerabilities, you lead by example and demonstrate to others that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's safe to share their own experiences. Then if somebody shares their mistake with you, be empathetic, further building that feeling of safety. Be constructive, not judgmental. Thank them for having the courage to share. Tell them how them sharing will prevent you from making a similar mistake. You may not be in charge of your organization, but you can create a culture around yourself where others feel psychologically safe with you to be able to talk openly about each other's mistakes and learn from them together.
I think one of the biggest challenges is creating that environment. How do you create that psychologically safe environment to do that?
So I found a book that really starts to bring it all together in kind of a nice tight package, and that was The Fearless Organization. It's by Amy Edmondson, and what she was researching is the difference between high performance teams and lower performance teams in hospitals. And what she found is that those high performance teams were reporting mistakes every single day, and sometimes multiple times per day. And then what she also found is that low performing teams reported them once every week or maybe even over every 3 weeks. And that actually threw her through a loop, because what she was expecting is that high performance teams made less mistakes. But what the biggest kind of key word was there was that it was reported, and that high performance teams felt psychologically safe in order to report those, because they knew that the culture was surrounded around using those mistakes to get better. And some of those big things that really helped those cultures exist and grow was, the first thing is that their leaders didn't lead with fear. When a mistake occurred, that leader immediately didn't jump down that person's throat. They were empathetic, and they came at from a perspective of constructively criticizing, but also in a situation where they wanted to figure out a way to make sure that a mistake never happened with that person again. So that was the first thing. The second thing was they found that the leaders, not just management, but also those experienced medics, were willing to have conversations about their mistakes freely in front of other people. And so those trainees, those new medics that are watching these leaders admit to their own mistakes was a really valuable thing for these cultures, because they started to feel very safe in those environments to also admit their mistakes. And the third thing, which kind of trickles down from those two, is that everyone needs to feel safe in that environment. And so all of the peers feel safe that when the conversation is over about that mistake, no one's leaving the room and talking behind their back or saying, oh, I would never make that mistake. What were they thinking kind of idea. And they felt safe that when the conversation was done, everyone's leaving and everyone is talking about how they can continue to be better and improve together. And that is what made a truly high performance team, is just feeling safe around everyone in that organization.
Something you said a moment ago that stuck out to me is you noticed your trainee made an error, and the first thought you had was, as their trainer, what have I done? How have I not measured up? How does that attitude of ownership impact the greater culture? And how can that be widespread?
I can't even take ownership on it complete for myself, because I had a partner that is also my mentor. And so we kind of took it on ourselves to both recognize that shouldn't have happened. And where that ownership comes from is just, one, being comfortable enough to know that when I report that mistake, that my managers aren't going to come down on me. And I feel like kind of like the father bear kind of idea in those senses, that I think that it's important for me in my position to make sure that my goal is to protect those people that are under me, that are still looking to me for that guidance. And I didn't want them to feel like they failed in that situation, is that I failed in putting them in a situation that wasn't fair to them. And so I guess I naturally kind of came in that position just by being in this company and being in this culture for quite some time. It was just natural for me to do that, and having the proper mentors in place that allowed me to grow in that mindset as well.
A lot of this is like lead by example, right? Especially that second point that you shared with your experienced people being vulnerable and sharing mistakes themselves, so that the newer, inexperienced people see that example that's being led for them. And similarly, when you're a trainer and you're willing to take on that mistake as your own, as like, this is a mistake I made, let's learn from it and move on. It's that lead by example.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the most powerful part of leadership, is leading by that example. And there's a lot of things that you can say, but if you're not backing up with your actions and leading with those actions, then it means nothing to anybody. And I think that's really a valuable tool that we can use, is just having the courage to lead by example. And that's really what it takes, is just putting away that fear of what people are going to do to judge you, because that usually the person that's going to judge you the most is yourself. And if you can put that aside and get rid of that fear, or try and nullify that fear, and have the courage to just put those words into action, I think that's a very powerful thing for teams.
Recognize your fear when you have that hesitation to speak up and admit your mistake. Realize what that fear is rooted in. You're likely afraid that people are going to judge you as a lesser provider. Try and remember they've all made mistakes too. That in reality, the person who is going to judge you the most is yourself. I'll tell you a personal story of how I think each of us can tackle this fear head on. When I was a second-year emergency medicine resident, I had a very sick patient in a back room during a very busy shift. In my haste to care for this critically ill patient, in addition to the rest of the department, I made a mistake. A mistake that led to the patient losing their pulses briefly. Thankfully, we recognized the situation immediately, and we were able to resuscitate the patient appropriately. And ultimately, he survived and had a good outcome, but it was a near miss, and one that shook me. Every week in residency, we held a morbidity and mortality conference where we stand in front of all the other residents and attending physicians and discuss our mistakes. We do a timeline and a play-by-play of those mistakes. My attending on that shift had no hesitation in submitting this case immediately to be reviewed by that committee. That was the first lead by example. It was my attending, the supervising physician, who was also in charge of that patient care, who had no hesitation in submitting the case for review, noting, we all should learn from this. Still, I'm a second-year resident in a 4-year program, and I'm still just, a young doc, and it was hard to get up in front of all my peers and admit my mistake. Here's how I tackled it. This is what worked for me. Hopefully it might work for you. I realized nobody could be harder on me than I was going to be on myself. So I owned that. I dissected what happened that day, what led to that mistake and oversight, and then I laid out a plan for how I was going to prevent that in the future. Then I stood up there, and as a lowly second-year resident, I led by example. I owned my mistake. I made no excuses for what happened. I was clear that it shouldn't have happened, and I laid out exactly what I learned from the mistake, what I felt I should have done differently, and what I planned to do in the future. And then my attending from the back of the room, who did not have to speak up at all, but took the microphone and in front of everyone said, this is not just your mistake. This is my mistake to own as well. We made this decision in discussion together as a team, and here are the mistakes I made in my thinking and how I could have done better. Talk about psychological safety. And then something beautiful happened. Others began contributing similar mistakes and helped me develop an even better plan for what to do in the future. They suggested things I hadn't thought of that had helped them to prevent a similar mistake. No matter where you are in the organization, you can lead. You can help contribute to that psychological safety. Overcome the fear of judgment and realize that if you lead with empathy and your own vulnerability,
when the time comes that you have constructive feedback to give to someone else, that person will have the psychological safety in you to better hear and receive that feedback.
You have a robust platform preparing newer medics. How do you infuse some of this level of ownership or some of these cultural pieces into that content?
I think I have a self-awareness of my strengths and my weaknesses. And I'm lucky enough to have a platform where I also have a lot of support with a lot of really great instructors and some that are just fantastic educators as well. And so I can really lean on them when I have weaknesses. And one of my weaknesses is that I'm not a big person when it comes to attention to detail. And so I can lean on them when I make mistakes in certain details of physiology or pathophysiology, or say words funny because I'm from Canada or something like that, right? So
You do say
I was going to say, where are you from? Florida?
yeah. Yeah. And so sometimes I can really lean on them. And I think that it comes from the self-awareness, and just I'm in a point where I'd feel okay being wrong. I think that's something that EMS in general can struggle with, is that they always want to be right. And they're afraid of the judgment that will happen if someone realizes that they're not perfect. And I've gotten past that and be like, okay, I'm okay being imperfect because it makes me who I am. And that's what made Master Medics what it is that if I always feared imperfections or perfection, then I would never have gotten anywhere where I am today. So I think that's where I really infuse it, is just losing that part of me, of that fear.
I think a lot of new medics, they have a role model, right? And they look up to them and think their actions are perfect. That's what I strive to be. But really, none of us are. And what is perfect is how we move through our errors, our mistakes, and our imperfections, I think.
Yeah, it's the ability to recognize them and learn from them. And I mean, what you were just saying resonates so much to me. As an educator, it's so nerve-wracking. The fear that I might say something wrong, teach something wrong, and somebody takes that and learns something wrong from me. Mm-hmm. But recognizing that even as an educator, you're not perfect, you're going to get things wrong, and you're going to learn from it and become a better educator from your own mistakes.
Well, even today, like I did a pre-course on resuscitation before intubation for Flight Bridge here for FAST. And the things that I was teaching, I thought were like as perfect as they possibly could be. And then all of a sudden, a fantastic, incredibly smart paramedic gets on stage and starts talking about pharmacology for resuscitation. There were things in that conversation that were contradicting some of the things that I mentioned. So I now have to go back and be like, hey, I know you just saw this this huge talk, and there were some things that he said were contradicting me. And I just want you to know that what he's saying, and he's got the proof to back those things up, and that seems like the current medicine. So let's go with that. But it's just, again, the same things, is that it's almost impossible to be perfect. And I kind of enjoy the idea of that I can be wrong and I can learn from those things. And that's kind of what he did in those situations. Like, now I get the opportunity to be like, hey, this is amazing information, take it, because it was on top of what you learned from me as well.
Did you catch that? Perfection is a myth. Realize this: mastery is not a place you get to. It's a daily journey that you continue on. Don't be afraid of your imperfections. Don't let the thought of perfection hold you back. Step boldly into the unknown where you have the potential to fail or get something wrong. You will learn so much more from those mistakes than you ever will if you never stepped outside of your comfort zone. Challenge yourself. Do hard things. Deliberate practice is pushing past your current skill level and making mistakes, and then learning how not to make those mistakes. This is how you elevate. This is how you develop mastery.
Geoff, tell me more about Master Your Medics. Tell me where the idea came from and how you got to where you are now.
Sure, yeah. The origin of it was really circled around that I wanted to continue to be an educator. I was moving from a large area that had a lot of schools that I could teach at, and that's what I was doing a lot of. And then I moved to a small town that didn't have those opportunities when we had kids, and we were kind of moving away from, big city life. But I still wanted to teach. And internet was around, and YouTube was starting to become a thing, and it was growing from just a funny video channel to an educational channel. And so what happened is that I was still tutoring a lot of these students that I had in paramedic school from this big city, and they were asking all the same questions because they're going through school all at the same time. And so instead of responding and texting them back all the same thing, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to get a piece of paper and I'm going to draw out what I'm talking about. And so I did a video of it, of me just drawing on a simple piece of paper on printer paper. And then I sent them a video, and one of the students ended up putting it on YouTube on their channel and ended up getting a bunch of views. And so I was like, maybe there's something here. And so it kind of came from that origin of like on accident in essence. And so we started creating more videos like that. They started getting more popular, and then it started to snowball from there and become something kind of widespread that I never really expected. So I'm just kind of like flying to the seat of my pants with it. And it's been kind of wild. And what we're going with now is that really our big thing is that we might do the continuing education. We might do all these little things, but our big bread and butter, the love where we are, is with students and working with schools. And so that's really what we're doing right now, is really putting all of our efforts into growing our platform to better initial education with paramedics and EMTs, and making sure that they have the proper anatomy physiology knowledge, they have the proper pathophysiology understanding of these things that they're going to see as paramedics. So that way they understand the why behind their treating things, not just because it says it in an algorithm. And that was what I wanted paramedics to understand, because I just don't think that they're getting enough of that right now as a whole. And that's kind of where we're flourishing with that and really enjoying that process of how we can continue to make education better for those students. And it's been a fun ride.
Man, this is so important. Don't just understand the algorithm. Understand the why behind the algorithm. We talk about this so much on this show, but it's so true. If you want to be prepared for every curveball, understand the principles behind the disease and treatment, and this will allow you to respond appropriately to the unexpected. For more on this idea of understanding the principles, go check out episode 31 about the ideal trauma call, where we talk about how trauma is just not algorithmic. Or go to Master Your Medics, check out all the great material they have to teach you about the why.
And you have a couple books too, right?
Yeah, we do. So we ended up, again, one of those things where we thought that it was just going to be for a couple educators. And then we kind of announced that we were doing this, and then it blew up, and we've sold over 10,000 copies of the initial book and well over a few thousand of copies of the expansion books. And yeah, so we're just kind of keep rolling with that, because we weren't expecting that either, but it's been a fun ride seeing that, because I guess it's very difficult to come up with realistic scenarios for educators, mostly because they don't have the time, because they're doing a million other things. And so we just tapped into that market as well, just helping them out with that.
That's awesome. Tell our listeners where they can learn more about you and Master Your Medics and the titles of your books.
Yeah, sure. So you can find us on every social media channel. If you like 1-minute videos, then we're the people to go hang out with. And you can find us at Master Your Medics, or you can search Geoff Murphy. Pretty much anywhere on social media, you'll find us and you'll find our videos. And our books are available there. Our videos and our online platform for students is available there as well.
And to clarify, it's not our weird Americanized spelling of Jeff.
Yeah. It is a Geoff version of it. Yeah, it's a little English.
Nice.
Well, thanks so much for sitting down with us, Jeff. We really appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Yeah, man.
Do you want to become a master of EMS? It starts with humility. Humility to admit to what you don't know, to seek the learning and understanding to fill those gaps, to be vulnerable, to learn from your mistakes, and to do that in public so others can help you learn from your mistakes as well. We don't master this alone. It truly is a team sport, and we need to elevate together. For more great learning, go check out Master Your Medics. And if you want to look really cool doing all this, go get yourself a sick pair of sunglasses from our sponsor, Frontline Optics, using the code EMS Cast 15 to get you 15% off these really high quality sunglasses. They have a no questions asked return and replacement policy, so there's no risk in checking them out. And if you want an opportunity to win a free pair, Click the link in the show description to fill out a short survey so that we can learn how we can make this show better for you, and you'll be entered into our drawing in September. Follow us on Instagram at EMS Cast, email or DM us if you have a topic you want us to cover. Leave us a review or tell a friend about us. It really does help us keep bringing you more content. Until next time, keep getting better at what you do because what you do matters.